Welcome, folks. Today's webinar topic is Grassroots Innovation in the Enterprise. I'm going to be your moderator, Hemant Alhan. And let me first introduce the topic, and then I'll cover some logistics, and then turn it over to turn over to the presenters for today. Again, welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time zone you are in. I know we usually have participants from different time zones, so the topic today, grassroots innovation in the enterprise, is a really good topic. And those of you who've been following lean startup ideas and the innovation topic in general know that the ideas covered in the lean startup book by Eric Ries are highly practiced and highly well adopted by startup companies in the tech community particularly. But the challenge often we find is in the larger enterprises, very difficult to apply them in that context. And that's the objective for this webinar today, is to help apply the core ideas of the lean startup in a mature enterprise context. And before I introduce the speakers, let me go through some of the logistics today. So we'll have about 45 minutes or so of presentation, and we will take some questions along the way, but dominantly leave 10-15 minutes at the end for questions. But you guys can, who are in the audience, keep sending your questions, and I'll decide as a moderator which questions make sense to cover along the way and which ones to just wait till the very end of the session. And after the session is over, we'll share the PowerPoint, the document, the PowerPoint or PDF, and recording to the registrants and attendees for today's session. So that's by way of logistics. Let me introduce some. So I'm delighted to have two real thought leaders on this topic of grassroots innovation in the enterprise. And these thought leaders are, good thing is they're both practitioners with over 2 decades of practice in this exact topic of enabling grassroots innovation. But not only that, they've actually written the book on it, and that book has just come out. So I'm delighted to have Hugh Molotsi. He has 22 years of experience at Intuit, one of the leaders in this thinking process of innovation, and he has been both serial innovator and innovation leader there. And he personally helped lead the formation of numerous new businesses, and as a frontline employee, and later coached and assisted other entrepreneurs in his role as an innovation leader. So welcome, Hugh. And we have Jeff Zayas as a presenter today. He's the co-author of the book that I just talked about, and he's Intuit's grassroots innovation leader, and he has been able to spend years focusing on this true passion of his, helping employees boldly innovate in ways that improve customers' lives. So with that, over to you guys, Hugh and Jeff, to cover this topic with us.
Thanks very much for the intro, Hemant. This is Jeff Zayas. And as Hemant mentioned, I've been at Intuit over 12 years and have been focusing on how to drive grassroots innovation across the enterprise.
Yeah, and I'm Hugh. Thank you very much for that introduction, Hemant. As you mentioned, I'd had a long career at Intuit, and one of the most gratifying parts of my tenure there were working on innovation and enabling entrepreneurs at Intuit to be successful and to bring new products to life. Today I'm part of a startup that we're building a mobile platform to help parents with their raising of their kids. One quick correction, Hemant, you had mentioned the book was already out. The book is still a work in progress. We're hoping to get it out soon, but definitely look forward to all of you getting to read it.
Sounds good. Thanks for the correction, Hugh.
Great. So, we've mentioned the phrase grassroots innovation in the enterprise a couple times now. So we're here to unpack that and, get into some more of the details and what we're really talking about for you. And, we're really talking about this focus on how employees with the right organizational support can really become innovators that create breakthroughs within a company.
Yeah, and so today we want to tell you a few stories about what has worked at companies like Atlassian, Intuit, Google, 3M, and other innovative companies. To start with, we believe the biggest underutilized assets in most companies are the ideas in their employees' heads. Now, this is because of something we call the insight-decision divide. In a typical company, frontline employees spend most of their days serving customers or working on products. They are constantly bombarded with insights on how to better serve customers and address unsolved opportunities. But they don't have the decision-making authority to make those kinds of decisions. Instead, those decisions are made by senior leaders who spend most of their days in meetings with other senior leaders. Hence the divide between where insights are happening and where decisions are being made.
So why do we care? Why do you care? Why is this so important? And what comes out of this divide is giant missed opportunities. Companies can often miss out on really game-changing innovations. So most, or I think all of us have heard about when Steve Wozniak was an HP employee. He actually already had the idea for a personal computer. He begged Hewlett-Packard 5 times to make the computer that essentially became the Apple I. And we know the rest of that history. It was not an HP computer. But there are companies out there that know how to take advantage of the ideas that are in frontline employees' heads. And they know how to empower these employees in a way that drives growth. So Gmail, for example, came from Paul Buchheit, and it was his innovation. He was the brainchild of that, and Google knew how to turn that into a growth driver. So we think that all companies can really benefit from building a culture of innovation. And what we're showing here is what we call our entrepreneurship empowerment model. And what this does is kind of unpack and break down, present the aspects that we think are crucial for creating the culture and environment that allows employees to be effective innovators. So let's start with, at the top, time and freedom. So what we feel is very important is to give employees self-directed time they can carve out from their day jobs to work on their own ideas, really. And for employees to be able to work on their own ideas, they need, first of all, the freedom to have the autonomy to take those ideas forward and some time set aside to work on the ideas. And what often happens is employees' time is fully consumed by assigned work. 100%, many employees may feel like they're working long hours and they don't have a opportunity to move ideas forward. But we're saying that an important aspect of creating this environment, this culture for entrepreneurship, is to give employees a certain amount of time and freedom. So as one example, Intuit has an unstructured time program, which provides every employee time to tap into their passion to drive growth. So unstructured time gives employees up to 10% of their time to work on their own projects. This is similar to Google's 20% time. And the time doesn't need to be built into an exact time allocation. So for example, it's not a half day per week or 1 day per week. What's important is that the employees can aggregate or through their own design use the time when and where it makes the best sense for them to innovate.
Okay, and just to jump in, one of the great successes that Intuit had from unstructured time was the TurboTax mobile application. Now, it may seem obvious today, but 6 years ago, everybody thought doing your taxes on a phone was a crazy idea. Now, Carol and Amir, who you see here, were 2 employees who were passionate about what optical character recognition could do for a customer. They had this big idea that if they could make OCR work, taking a picture of a W-2 would greatly simplify the tax process. Unstructured time allowed them to work on the idea so they had something to show. Amir says, You can't argue with working code. It becomes your talking piece. The prototype proved really effective in selling senior leaders on the project. And if you fast forward to today, mobile is a big part of how Intuit is making doing your taxes easy and maintaining their leadership in the self-preparation tax software market. Another example I want to give is Atlassian. Every quarter, Atlassian gives its employees 24 hours to innovate, where they can work on whatever they want, assemble into teams, and build something great. Atlassian wants employees to do something other than their regular job. Be bold, adventurous, solve big problems creatively. Now, the people you see here are Andreas, Nick, Mike, Ross, and Scott. So they spent one of these days to hack together a simple portal that they put together to create Jira issues. This project eventually became Jira Service Desk, and Jira Service Desk is now one of Atlassian's fastest growing products in their history.
So with the next facet of our model has to do with design thinking. And design thinking is critically important, we believe, to enabling everybody to innovate effectively. So one of the good examples of design thinking, we feel, is that there's a way of taking a very broad topic. So design thinking can really cover so many aspects of how people get close to customers, storytelling, learning about what customers care about, the customer benefit, brainstorming, innovating, doing prototyping and experimentation. And one thing that's happened at Intuit is to basically coalesce that down to a 3-point model. And what's going on there is essentially you can think of design thinking as 3 different points. So one is get deep customer empathy. Another is go broad to go narrow. So the notion that you want to be able to think expansively in a generating way and have a lot of ideas before you narrow down to one. And then the third principle is really around you want to be experimenting with customers to learn. So one case study, an example of design thinking working well, especially since so many companies out there are utilizing design thinking as a principle how in terms of innovating, is Kaiser. So just one of the examples where Kaiser got a big win, a big advance for their customers out of design thinking was they had noticed a big problem in shift changes amongst nurses. And the issue manifested itself in a couple ways. In one way, just the fact that it took 45 minutes for a shift change to even occur from one nursing staff to another. And even more importantly, there were many errors generally made in shift changes. So this could be devastating in terms of the quality of the patient's care. So what Kaiser did was a couple things. First of all, they didn't feel they had design thinking acumen yet, so they brought in IDEO. And IDEO helped them learn and build up their own expertise in terms of how to apply design thinking. But in a nutshell, what they did is they interviewed and observed patients and nurses and doctors and the entire staff. They evaluated what was going on. They found some problems, some specific root cause, and they ended up over months analyzing, synthesizing, and then developing a whole new program of shift changes for nurses where not only did the shift changes happen 4 times as fast, but the number of errors were reduced up to 80% in terms of how to execute a shift change. And that was based on their learning and application of design thinking. So the next facet of the model we have is around open collaboration. And, we feel that what's really necessary for innovation in a corporation is that employees need to collaborate with each other. There needs to be transparency across the organization in terms of what's going on, who's doing what with which customers, what are the new ideas, what has been learned and executed, what experiments have been run. So this is quite helpful for a number of reasons, but it's also that you never know who in the company is working on something that is actually the missing ingredient that turns an idea into something that really works, something that delights customers. So one example here, and this is a pretty famous example, is the Post-it note at 3M. So, the reason we like to talk about this is that the story is often not quite told correctly. What really happened with the Post-it note over a number of years is that, there's a program at 3M that exists to this day where scientists present at seminars across the company with the express idea that whatever their invention is, other scientists across the company will see what's going on. And there are even special rewards and a special job title that has to do with scientists who know how to apply inventions to solve a customer need. So what happened with the Post-it was Spencer Silver was a scientist who accidentally developed this low-tech adhesive. It wasn't immediately obvious how you would use this in any positive way. He didn't know how to apply the invention, but he did know that he should tour around and basically present what he came up with to other scientists. Now, Art Fry was the scientist who attended one of Spencer's seminars, and he got the idea for a sticky bookmark. And it's because of their collaboration that Post-it notes were born. And now, of course, Post-it notes are everywhere. It's an iconic example of great innovation across the world.
Okay, then the next facet in our entrepreneurship empowerment model is experimentation. So in an experimentation culture, employees are provided the tools and infrastructure to test their ideas. Decisions are made with data instead of opinions. And instead of arguing over ideas, employees run experiments to measure which idea has the most merit. In fact, when you make decisions by experimentation, the best ideas win. Now, this experimentation mindset is exemplified in Eric Ries's The Lean Startup. Hopefully, a lot of you have read this book. I highly recommend it. Now, some of you may have heard of Eric's story. After he graduated from college, he went directly into the startup world. And so after a few years, he had the experience in working in startups that had failed and startups that had succeeded. And he found out that there was a misconception that successful startups were successful because they had good ideas, and the unsuccessful startups had bad ideas. Instead, he said, no, actually, all ideas suck. Successful startups are the ones with the best process. Now, that was a weird thing to say. You wouldn't think process and startup belong in the same sentence. What he meant is that every idea is fundamentally flawed in ways you won't discover until customers start to use your product. So he developed this lean startup build, measure, learn loop where you take an idea, you build it, you deploy it to customers, and through measurement, you learn what's working and what's not working. And you use that learning to make your idea better. Now, here's what he meant by process. Startups with the best process go through the build, measure loop very quickly, so they are able to iterate several times to eventually perfect their idea. Startups with a poor process spend all their time and funding building the idea once, and when it fails and the product doesn't work for customers, well, it's too bad because by that time they've typically run out of funding. So with an experimentation mindset, One of the key things is an emphasis on learning, but also an emphasis on speed. Now, as an example, I want to talk about Google. Google has been a leader in using experiments to constantly improve their search engine algorithms. One of their search improvements was called Google Panda. It was named after Navneet Panda, who was one of the engineers who helped develop this algorithm. Now, Google's original PageRank algorithm ranked pages by how many other pages linked to that page. Now, this algorithm worked really well. This is what brought Google its initial success. However, people learned how to game PageRank. The way they would game it is they would build link farms to get their low-quality websites, which typically had lots and lots of ads, to show up high on search results. Panda worked by evaluating whole websites instead of just a single page. In this way, they could detect if a page was benefiting from a link farm. And on release in 2011, search improved dramatically for everybody who used Google, as spammy websites no longer featured prominently on search results. Through experimentation, Google has continued to improve the Panda algorithm. Now, the next facet we want to talk about is a dedicated innovation team. To sustain a culture of innovation, employees must be supported by a dedicated team who will provide the tools, the mindset, and guidance needed to accelerate innovation progress. These dedicated capability builders will become powerful tuners and amplifiers for your thriving culture of entrepreneurship. Now, Peter Drucker once said, only 3 things happen naturally in organizations: friction, confusion, and underperformance. Everything else requires leadership. Indeed, it's no different for innovation. It just won't happen naturally in your company. A dedicated innovation team is critical. And an example of innovation leadership, we'll talk about Google again. One of the features of Google's campus is they have something called the Garage. The Garage is a lab set up for employees to use their 20% time to express their creativity. The Garage is absolutely packed with equipment from 3D printers to shop vacs to sewing machines to a CNC milling machine. Employees can come and take classes on how to use the equipment. But for this lab to run and be maintained requires full-time employees. And this is just one benefit of having a dedicated innovation team. But speaking of Google, there is a myth that Google no longer supports 20% time. In fact, some of you may have heard it being maligned as 120% time. In other words, if your job is so busy, if you're already working 60 hours a week, where would you find time to work on your 20% project? Well, as it turns out, Google's 20% time is still in place. Although according to Laszlo Bock, he's their former HR leader, only about 10% of employees are still using it. The perception that the program has been canceled came after the Google Labs team was disbanded in 2011. At the time, what Google was trying to do was they wanted to align innovation work within divisions. So instead of having one central innovation team, they wanted the experimentation and 20% work to happen within the context of a few of their big products.
Hey, Hugh and Jeff, can we take one question on this topic, the one you just covered before 20%, the dedicated innovation team?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so the question is, can you amplify a little bit more on how does that work? Is that supposed to be a support team that others can come to to support their innovative ideas, or how does that kind of cut through the organization and actually not constrain innovation?
So Jeff, maybe you can answer this question by talking about your role at Intuit and how you work with other innovation leaders.
Right, because that's exactly what I do at Intuit, is that in the center of the company, so within the office of the president, we call it, we have a few of us who are innovation leaders. And what we do is we really focus on enabling the capability of innovation across the company. And that's to not be confused with, okay, there's only a few innovators in the company. It's the opposite. So we're not the innovators. We're the people who are building up the capability, meaning the programs that enable the equivalent of, the 6-point model we have that Q and I are presenting today. The people that kind of like advise and help create the content and the training and the things that sort of fan out from the center across the company. In our case, it's an 8,000 person company. So there are a lot of programs, everything from HR to finance to infrastructure, that kind of like latch on to what we're doing and help take content and help coach. But what we mean by this dedicated team is, yes, not a dedicated place where innovation happens, but a dedicated team that carries the torch for innovation, for everyone being an innovator, for, the mindset, the behaviors that create the culture where people are expected to and then actually enabled and are capable of innovating in their day-to-day work.
Yeah, and just to add on to what Jeff said, there are many ways in which an innovation team can provide value. One of the things we used to do at Intuit, as you mentioned earlier, Intuit has a program called Unstructured Time, which is, again, similar to Google's 20% time. And one of the things we would do is we would monitor usage of unstructured time across the company. And in organizations where we saw low usage, we would then go and talk to leaders of that organization. And the discussions we would have with them were not contentious discussions. We weren't going there to blame them or point a finger and say, hey, why aren't your employees using unstructured time? Instead, we would go there to essentially have a generative discussion to say, hey, we're seeing the usage of unstructured time in your organization is not high. What can we do to make unstructured time work in your organization? And in fact, how can we use unstructured time as a lever to help you, the leader of this organization, address your priorities? And by having that type of discussion, we were typically able to help organizations figure out how to set up processes, structure, and support so that employees were using unstructured time. And again, using it in a way in which the leaders felt like, hey, this is actually helping me achieve the priorities for the organization.
Great. Well, thank you. Let me just ask one quick follow-up to this explanation of centralized innovation team. So in your experiences, if a frontline employee has an innovative idea in the organizations you've been, but they either don't feel a need to go through the innovation team or for some reason don't end up going through the centralized innovation team, can they still pursue and have the impact of the innovative idea without needing to go through this centralized team?
Yeah, let's flip that around. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say absolutely. The point of the innovation team is not to be a regulatory agency. That they are there really to nurture the culture. If somebody works on a team and they have an idea and their manager is supportive, the environment is supportive, they have all the resources they need, by all means, we would celebrate them moving forward. And in fact, we'd consider that a very healthy aspect of the culture, that the person doesn't feel like they need any central support. However, more typically, you'll find as people are working on the ideas, they will start to run into issues or challenges where they need help. For example, they may need help in terms of addressing legal requirements. How do I pick a name that doesn't infringe on another company's trademarks or copyrights? How do I deal with certain brand issues? or sometimes it's need for resources, and those types of things, which a central team it can be set up to address very effectively, very efficiently. And in fact, that was one of the principal objectives of the Intuit Labs innovation team that we had, which was to really make the life for our entrepreneurs as easy as we could. Sorry, Jeff, you were going to say something.
Oh, just, sort of an internal joke, which probably a lot of people use is, the goal is to work yourself out of a job. So I think it supports, a lot of what Hugh is saying in terms of what the desire would be. There's not a need for the central team at some point in the infinite future, because the capability is so ingrained and embedded across the company that everybody can innovate without any need for help whatsoever. Now, in practical purposes, we're saying the opposite. We're saying, that doesn't naturally happen. It doesn't organically happen. So the central team is there to help. But what we found also is, I think it might be built into the question you asked, Hemant, or you forwarded, was, the central team shouldn't be some arbiter of what constitutes good innovation and thumbs up, thumbs down. And, it doesn't meet the specification of the great innovation masters. It's quite the opposite. It should be, like Hugh is saying, a group of people who are more than anything helpful and are helping to knock down the barriers and helping to enable innovation in all the ways that don't just generally organically happen.
Right. Makes sense. Great. Thank you, gentlemen, for that explanation.
Yeah, and just to complete the thought we were having about Google's 20% time. Again, I was saying earlier how there is this myth that it's no longer supported, but that started in 2011 when Google had this Google Labs team, which was a central team responsible for nurturing 20% time across the organization. And with this shift from having exploratory innovation to more strategically aligned innovation, the company decided to disband the Google Labs team. And unfortunately, what they didn't anticipate is that would then create the damaging perception that, I guess 20% time isn't really going to happen anymore. And so there are some people who have that perception. But in actual fact, as we said, 20% time is still supported. And in fact, Google continues to be a shining example of the effectiveness of giving employees time and freedom to work on their own ideas. Over 50% of Google's products and like 25% of their revenue today comes from projects that were birthed in 20% time. And some of these wins even include more recent products like Google Now and the Android Watch. So I think with Google, you have both hopefully inspiration and also a cautionary tale about how to think about these programs. The inspiration, of course, is through products like Gmail, like the Android Watch. There is a lot of benefit a company can get from empowering employees to work on their own ideas. However, the cautionary part of the tale is when you don't have a central innovation team supporting your innovation culture, you are susceptible to some of these setbacks in perception when people no longer have the support that they once had to work on their time. So hence, this is why we feel very passionately that companies should think about resourcing a dedicated team to support their entrepreneurs.
Great, thanks.
Okay, so the next facet of our model we call Align for Yes. And what we're talking about here is really that, in a typical, let's say, older style corporation, there's not natural alignment around everybody being an innovator, around, creating breakthroughs and everybody, being bold and moving the products and services forward in a way that can annihilate the competition. Sometimes there are people that, based on their background, based on the job function they're in, are kind of more in the job of saying no or working as obstacles. And then what we're saying in our innovation model is it's very important to get to the point where there's this notion that the company has an overall alignment towards mission and longer-term goals. So not just solving short-term, but very often the longer-term goals have to do with living the values to reach some great state where the company is just really thriving, hitting on all cylinders. And we're saying the way to get there is to have everybody aligned towards those larger goals, and how you get there by innovating, amongst other things. And at some point, that means that people can, in different functions, can come together in a cross-functional way and get to enablement. That's what the yes means, rather than just being obstacles towards progress or protecting the company from a legal standpoint or fiduciary responsibility about the expensive experiments. There are all sorts of things that we've all seen come up. But when you flip that around, and we have some data points that Intuit, where the legal team decided that get to yes was going to be their priority, we saw that all the different parts of the organization could structure themselves around an alignment that helps the company reach its goals. Now, inherent to that notion is that there are different ways of working than maybe the old style way where some crazy purple squirrels are the innovators and other people are protecting the bank account and others are protecting the legal position and whatnot. And the idea is that, we're all in this together, and we're also making decisions not just based on the opinions of strong leaders and who's highest on the totem pole, but great leaders are actually no longer the Caesar with thumbs up or thumbs down, but decisions are being made based on data, based on real information. So we feel that when people are aligned, when the model is really being executed to the point where there's knowledge of the customer, empathy, experimentation, data, people are trying to work together to get to a better overall long-term result for the company, then decisions and the role of the leader can be based on what is the data saying, what has been the separation from fact and opinion, and the leaders are now just coaching and unblocking to enable those good decisions.
Yeah.
So for that reason, we have a little bit of a breakout sidebar, let's call it here, where one of the really effective behaviors we find from a leadership standpoint is coaching. And part of our book talks about how you apply coaching and how important that is. So at a very, very high level, I'll just touch on a few points, actually 5 points that we found are great coaching approaches that really help a company live this model we've been talking about. So, at first blush, these seem like the obvious things that we probably feel we're all doing each day. So I'll just call attention to maybe the less obvious learnings from each category. So first of all, it's easy to see that a great coach or, recognize that a great coach will come in and use a lot of inquiry. But what we've observed in some of the best coaches, and, Hugh and I feel like we've been lucky enough to observe up close, Scott Cook, who's a co-founder of Intuit, Bill Campbell, who passed last year, but was often referred to as the CEO whisperer, and he served on the board of Apple and Intuit and Amazon and pretty much everywhere. He was literally referred to as the coach in terms of his nickname, in terms of his position in the business world. He was really the coach to CEOs. And then observing from afar, Steve Jobs, who actually, contrary to popular belief, was focused on trying to get his teams to execute quite effectively, and not only just follow up on his visions. But some of these best coaching approaches we feel have to do with, for example, in inquiry, we see Scott Cook as just one example, start every coaching meeting with, what's the most important thing I can help you with today? So just going straight to kind of a prioritized question around what's going to be most helpful. And so inquiry is the way to get there, having an attitude starting with where does the team or a person want to be helped, is a great starting point that enables success. Number two, just moving pretty quickly, storytelling. So of course we know the value of storytelling. It's how our brains work. It's how we remember things. It's how we absorb material and feel excited and emotional, or at least retain material. And, you know, the best coaches, they really hone their stories down to perfection. It's just amazing how, you know, time after time again, you see the very, very best leaders and coaches with not only good stories, but very, very tight stories that really focus on a key message. And then they've got a database going, right? So whatever the occurrence is, they've got a nice tight story that resonates to really teach that lesson. A third thing, so pushing for a bold vision. So quite often, you know, I found this myself, when you step back and look at, okay, what just happened? How was today? Or how was that last meeting? When you analyze, you know, who is really pushing for a bold vision versus getting caught up in the day-to-day, in the immediacy, and to the short-term thinking, it's just very typical to be caught up in things that are just incremental or focused on the status quo, you know, barely moving forward from where we are. And the best coaches always stay rooted in this notion of having a bold vision that they're helping us all be pushed towards. Fourth point, this was less obvious to me, which is the best coaches can often just really think about the energy of a team. So Hugh and I actually got to work with Scott Cook on, you know, an analysis of coaching sessions where we literally tried to measure what was the energy of a team coming into coaching versus when they left the coaching experience. Was the energy amplified? You know, I don't know how many of us have seen this, but you know, depending on the style and whatnot, it's possible for a team to feel beat up and, you know, go back with their tail between their legs, or an individual can feel that way. And the question then is, how much have you actually helped that person? Tough love can be useful, but, you know, we found some of the best coaching approaches to focus on, you know, what can we find in terms of what a team's doing well, and then build around their strengths, and then amplify the energy and leave that person or innovation team so pumped up, their energy is actually amplified to move forward better. And then a fifth, which definitely came straight from Scott Cook, is, you know, lecturing's one thing, but what's great, so this requires an interpersonal experience, but whether it's with an individual or a small team, get in there as a coach and do it with them. You know, if the team that's get better at something, you can do it together at first, and then they'll get the idea of what just happened. They'll have the hands-on experience, and then after that, they can do whatever this thing is they needed to improve at. You did it with them, and you've done it together, and now they can move forward.
Okay, thanks for that, Jeff. So, you know, in summary, we talked about this insight decision divide. If you're going to be a successful company that is innovating and taking advantage of all these great ideas that your employees have, you must bridge this insight decision divide. And that means empowering your employees to drive growth. It means empowering your employees to work on their own ideas. So we want to thank you all for attending this webinar. As Hemant mentioned, we are working on a book that contains a lot of what you heard here today and a lot more information. Please go to our website, which is grassroots.guide. And you're also welcome to follow us on Twitter. My handle is at Hugh Malazzi, and Jeff's is at Jeff Zayas. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Jeff and Hugh. We have a number of questions we would love to get to, but let me encourage audience to send any more questions they may have on their minds as they have heard this discussion around grassroots innovation. And while you're doing that, audience are doing that, let me just quickly do a quick intro to Synerzip for those of you in the audience who may be new to us. So if Jeff or Hugh, either of you have the control, just go to the next page. I'll quickly introduce Synerzip, and then we'll take questions. So Synerzip is your trusted software product development partner, and we help our clients who tend to be fast-growing technology companies accelerate their product roadmap and do that in a capital cost-efficient way. We have a development center in India and a team in Silicon Valley and Texas, and through that combination, we are able to provide significant cost advantage. And many of our clients value the fact that we have such a diverse set of cutting-edge technology skills, whether it is mobile, whether it is DevOps, whether it is, any of the big data and analytics kind of work. We tend to have much more by way of broad skills than our clients have in-house, and they're able to fill those skill gaps by working with us. And we are able to cover the time zone through a US team and India team, like I mentioned. So let's go to next page. That'll give a quick kind of a glimpse of our clients. Again, broad range of clients, no particular industry kind of a bias. We serve all industries, but they all tend to be technology companies, fast growing, usually venture backed or private equity backed. That's kind of our forte. And so we are big believers of following agile and lean startup way of doing stuff. And that's why webinars like these innovation topics are very dear to us. So with that introduction out of the way, let's go to the next page. I think we also want to plug in next month's webinar. So if you can go to next page. Yeah. So we have next month, we do these webinars monthly on topics related to cutting edge software development and innovation. The next month webinar is on this topic called behavior driven development, which is a very powerful way to build stuff that works right as it was intended. So look forward to that. So with that, let's take some questions now. So you guys ready, you and Jeff, for the next few minutes to cover some questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's take the first one, which is you talked about experimentation as an important part of the innovation framework. So one question is, inherent part of experimentation often is failure. So how does this framework that you guys talked about, or what you have seen in your practice, how to allow people to fail in situations where the failure actually has significant impact in terms of, say, end customer? So if you're a company, I think an example here is, they have a deadline to deliver to end customer, but that deadline is important, and therefore is there room for experimentation and failure allowed to employees to have that freedom? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, so I'll try and answer that question. I think it's important to start off by saying, if having an experimentation mindset means that your primary goal is learning. When you're running an experiment, you want to learn. And if that's your primary goal, then there's really no notion of failure, because you'll develop a hypothesis, you will build a vehicle for testing that hypothesis, and through your experiment, you will learn whether or not that hypothesis is validated or not. And if it's not validated, that is valuable learning. And that often leads to insights for more ideas, more hypotheses to try. So the experimentation mindset, I always say to people, if we can banish the word failure and replace it by learning, we have moved very far ahead in the game. But the scenario described is a very typical one where I might have a product that has a particular deadline, or I may have some deliverables for clients that are due on a certain time frame. It's certainly true that under those type of conditions, running experiments is much more challenging. However, I'll also say that if you are under those kinds of conditions, it almost makes experimentation even that much more critical. Because remember, the alternative without experimentation means we come up with an idea, without validation, we build it and we deliver it, let's say, to a client. And after you spent a lot of time, the client has spent a lot of money, the client uses it. And that's when we learn whether or not it's going to work or not work. So it feels like the consequences are much more severe if that original idea was wrong. And in fact, in the type of work we do, we find it's typical that when you start off with an idea, it's very typical that when that idea is brought to life, that there's going to be at least a few things that you didn't get right. Again, when you get to actually put something in customers' hands is when you start to learn very quickly what's working and what's not working. So my alternative suggestion for a situation where somebody may say, look, I have to deliver something to a client by the end of October. I don't have time to experiment. I would say to them, let's figure out a way in which we can deliver maybe 2 or 3 releases before October to the client, so that along the way we are learning from the client what's working, what's not working. That is certainly less risky than hoping that what we build will work perfectly in the end.
Right. Makes sense. Great. Thank you. Let's take another question. So the question here is, what if the organization have lots of ideas, large number of ideas? How do you help? What have you seen that works well in choosing good ideas? So that, I guess to amplify this example that you guys shared, the Steve Wozniak's idea of Apple One. How do you, of lots of ideas that a company HP may have, how do they pick the Steve Wozniak's Apple idea?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And this is something I'm personally very passionate about, which is it is futile to try and judge ideas or let's say have employees submit hundreds of ideas and say I'm going to pick the best ones. The reason I say it's futile is because often the very best ideas are the worst sounding ideas. Just to give you a real example, Evan Spiegel, the co-founder of Snapchat, he was actually an intern at Intuit, and he, before he went on to form his company. And so I would ask employees at Intuit, I'd say, if Evan had come to you and pitched you the idea for Snapchat, would you have funded it? And the reason I use that story is because, I tell people, Snapchat is one of the worst sounding ideas I've ever heard. This idea that a service where you send a message and it disappears after 30 seconds. And yet, who can argue with Snapchat's success? They have, double-digit billions in market capitalization, and they have millions of users. And so the lean startup methodology teaches us is that ideas can actually prove themselves. And it doesn't take a lot of effort and a lot of resources to run lean experiments. And so to answer your question, rather than trying to pick among the hundreds of ideas, what we encourage it instead is to say, give your employees the tools to actually run experiments on their ideas so that the best ideas prove themselves. You don't need somebody to be the perfect judge. Instead, the ideas that get the most traction, the ideas that make the most progress are the ones that would rise to the top. And this way you're building a meritocracy of ideas rather than having ideas that are influenced by things like PowerPoint and politics.
Right. Yes, let me add one thing. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Hamid. This is Jeff. I was just going to add that, in the context of your question with HP and Steve Wozniak, let's say it would have put them maybe perhaps a bit ahead of their time, but if HP had been making decisions based on data and early experimentation, look at what happened. So Steve Wozniak found Steve Jobs as a partner. Wozniak had already built that personal computer, right? So that's one of the things we ask people with, if you're passionate about an idea, can you go out and move it forward to the point where you can actually get some customer data, both qualitative and quantitative? That Steve Jobs went out and got an order for 100 computers, right? So there was a customer and there was a working prototype. So, things like that, and then customer feedback, things like that can really help enable informed decisions rather than like Hugh was saying, having some exalted person, judge ideas with their opinions, which is exactly what we don't want.
Right. Or the earlier point you guys were making, which is, or have this centralized team become a kind of a evaluator of ideas. So you're saying that's also not a good idea. Let the,
Right.
yeah, good.
Yeah, the centralized team would basically say what Hugh and I just said, which is, hey, let's enable them to go get data and go, lead to an informed decision based on merit.
Yeah, in fact, just to add to that, often when somebody comes to me with an idea and asks my opinion, what do you think of this idea? I resist the temptation to give them my judgment of, oh, it's good or it's not good. Instead, I prefer to ask, well, how passionate are you about it? Because often that's more relevant than what I think about whether the idea is a good one or not. And you find that the passion is actually a very effective filter when you have hundreds and hundreds of ideas, because you'll often find that only a small percentage of those innovators with those ideas are actually really passionate about it. And they're the ones who will put in the work and the time to actually build something that they can go and test.
Right. Makes a lot of sense. So let's take another question in the few more minutes we have, which relates to this one. So talking about passion, that is an important ingredient to push the ideas further. Is there a notion of some sort of a reward to entrepreneurs who come up with ideas? Have you seen something that work? Or putting the question differently, is there an implication of this model that you talked about into the individual performance reviews that organizations do? Does it play a role in there?
Yeah, the way I'll answer this question is because we get it a lot. Some people would say things like, hey, if I have a great idea, why would I contribute it to the company? Why wouldn't I just go off and form a startup and make more money on my own? And certainly a lot of people have that mindset. But what we've seen with entrepreneurship is that employees are actually primarily motivated by the mission of the company. They're motivated by this notion of how can I help the company? How can I help the company's customers? And that is in its way, its intrinsic reward, which is this notion that I'm actually helping solve the problems for what could be millions of customers. Now, having said that, companies like Google, like Intuit, like Atlassian have set up awards and different kinds of frameworks to recognize innovators. For example, at Intuit has every year the founder, Scott Cook, he awards what they call the Scott Cook Innovation Awards. And this essentially recognizes at the company level the best innovators around the company, and they are recognized again in front of all the employees. And in addition to that, they're typically given other benefits, including more time that they can use to work on their own ideas. But beyond that, I would say if you are at a company and you're a very effective innovator, typically the existing performance management metrics should typically recognize you, obviously give you the promotions and the financial rewards that you would expect.
Great, thanks. Let's take one more question. At least we have a few more minutes. So how do we get in organizations that are where people or person or perhaps leader is more used to command and control form? How do we get them to embrace ideas like these? Any suggestions?
Yeah, I welcome people to look at an article I wrote about Steve Jobs. I think most of us are very familiar about how when Jobs returned to Apple, how he took a company that was on life support and turned them into the most profitable company in the history of the world. And many people think he did that because, he's this genius with all these great ideas. But actually, if you take a closer look at what he did during that time, you'll find that none of the ideas, this starts with the iMac to the iPod to the iPhone and iTunes, you find all of those things were not actually ideas from Steve Jobs. They were ideas from employees at Apple. And in fact, what Steve Jobs did well was create a culture of innovation where ideas like that could be contributed, and where he could curate and identify what essentially would be these game-changing ideas. And so if you want to be the type of leader in the same ilk as a Steve Jobs, then you have to you have to give up this notion that you know all the answers and instead cultivate this culture of innovation.
Right. Well, thank you, Hugh, and thank you, Jeff. That's all the time we have. So really appreciate you guys coming on and sharing your insights on driving innovation at the grassroots level in enterprise. And audience, look forward to next month's webinar, Behavior-Driven Development. We'll see you guys next month.
All right. Thanks so much, and Jill. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.
Okay.